So we're speaking with Professor Jojo Abinales of the University of Hawaii in Manoa, and we'll be speaking about North Korea and the impact of the threats in the region. So thank you for joining us, Professor.
Nice meeting you.
Let's start from the very beginning, because right now the tensions are escalating, but let's go back and talk about how it even came to this point.
Well, you have two narcissistic leader in the United States and North Korea, and Trump and Kim Jong-un. The last time you had leaders like this was under Idi Amin and Mao Zedong. So they're very narcissistic. They have a simple view of the world, and they think the world is a street fight. So this is what's different from the previous American presidents, and even to a certain extent from the father of this president now in North Korea. So what's escalating it is Trump tweeting and saying all these, words and phrases that can cause concerns from all over the place. And so media picks up on that, and then the pundits pick up on that. And so you have this, illusory world of, Guam will disappear in the next few weeks.
Had the U.S. If the U.S. had a different president, do you believe that tensions would have escalated the way they are now?
No, I think the East Asia desk of the State Department is one of the best actually under both Republican Bush and Obama, even as far as Clinton. What Trump has done is to freeze the State Department folks, and put in his political appointees. So there's nothing, for example, the undersecretaries of East Asia, the East Asia section of the State Department, are not. The list is not full because there's nobody there, and none of these the people that belong to the Republican Democratic parties who were with the East Asia Department in the past would like to join it. This president changes his mind every day. Has a very, very, very limited knowledge of the world. So that's the one thing. I mean, the American ambassador to the Philippines, Ambassador Kim, was part of that team of State Department folks who were able to deal with the North Koreans. Maybe it's worth interviewing him. So that you have that. There's a gap in the State Department. There are good, able negotiators, diplomats, and even military officers who are familiar with the North Korean situation.
Okay, well, the fact of the matter is that we do have President Trump in the U.S., we have the current leader of North Korea, and now we're here where tensions have escalated. Do you actually think these tensions or these threats will materialize?
No. I mean, so the North Koreans are threatening to launch a missile in Guam. The Japanese the other day said, we'll intercept it. Okay? 4 years ago, the Japanese already bought Aegis missiles that will shoot down missiles coming from the north. So the Japanese saying, well, we can intercept that. Now, in case the Japanese fail, supposing they missed, then you have the Pacific Command here. The Pacific Command is the largest, is the headquarters of the Pacific Fleet of the United States. It would be safe to assume that they have missiles that are, ready to defend the headquarters itself from outside attacks. If you recall, during the Cold War, Hawaii actually played the role of a monitoring station of possible missiles being targeted to Russia, to the Soviet Union, from the U.S. mainland. So, in a certain way, if Japan misses it, Pacific Command will not, will stop that missile. Remember, it's a one missile, okay? And some of the anti-missile defenses of the United States are actually designed to cope with multiple missile attacks. So the threat is not there. I mean, in a sense, again, Trump ups the ante, Kim Jong-un ups the ante, the newspapers, news media panics and puts it in the headline, and then the pundits speak on it. So, and the one evidence that this is not really a crisis is if you ask South Koreans, okay, what they think of all of this, they don't care. I have a colleague who teaches Korea here at the Asian Studies program. She just got back from Seoul the other day, and I said, so what is happening there? And they said, nothing. Life goes on. You know, they don't really give a much concern about this tension going on. They're more worried about Trump than Kim Jong Un. It's a funny thing. And she said the reason for that is probably because they know that the North Koreans are afraid that their government will collapse in case of a war against the South. I mean, the South and the U.S. Army can literally destroy the North Korean army. And second is you live in that kind of fog, and there's always the threat. North Korea is just 40 miles away from Seoul. You can learn to cope with it becomes normal for your part, in your part, and you learn to cope with it and continue with your life. The third reason I think is one of the editors, the Korean editors in Seoul said, well, these are our siblings, these are our brothers, our cousins, the North Koreans. Okay, we were artificially cut off in the war in 1954. So it's like, are you going to really attack your cousin? And they think that the North Koreans will think the same thing. Why am I going to go? Well, our leader is, a nutcase, but my cousin, my grandfather, my relatives are on the other side. So they think that this connection as siblings also would understate, will minimize the crisis. So it's so psychological, it's military, it's also political.
Okay, so Professor, you mentioned all these three reasons why you think it's not going to escalate. But do you think part of that is that these threats have been ongoing for so long that they've gotten used to not worrying? What do you think would make them start worrying? And this is, I think, if you look back...
Which mean the Koreans?
The South Koreans. Because if you look in the past, how many years, these threats have been ongoing, right? But the region now seems, I guess, a little more cautious. But you were saying in South Korea, it's still the same. The attitude is still the same. Is that really a smart marker of whether the crisis will go through or not?
According to my colleague, the older generation are worried because they went through war. Okay, the grandfathers, but they were in at war. The children and their grandchildren are not. There is it's complete confidence on the ability of the South Korean army and the U.S. Army Command in Korea to defeat the North Koreans. There is worry about a missile, but how many counter missiles the Japanese have? So this idea that you can actually be protected, there will be a war, but we're more than ready than that. Have you been to Seoul?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, Seoul has all these wonderful underground tunnels to get people ready in case of an attack. So it's really always a city that's bustling, very cosmopolitan, but also always unconsciously ready for a state of war.
Okay.
So I think that explains why Koreans are not as worried about this, while the rest of the world, seems to be going crazy about it.
You mentioned what could possibly happen if they were to attack. North Korea understands they do not have the capacity to go to war against the United States. How about the region? What would the consequences be for Southeast Asia, the countries nearby, the Philippines, if this were to escalate?
If there escalate, excuse me, the Chinese are going to intervene, okay? And the lifeblood of the North Koreans is China. The Chinese will not escalate a war in the region where the U.S., it's expanding itself. It's expanding economically and militarily in the region. Why would it, mess up with that? Okay. So if the North Koreans do escalate the war, then I think the Chinese will come in and say, stop. This is much unlike in the 1950s where the North Koreans were being defeated and the Chinese came in. So that's the first thing. I mean, you're approaching a point where there is actually sort of a balance of power between China, Japan, and the U.S.
Okay.
I mean, the U.S. is the most powerful fleet in the region, but you have a president who wants to withdraw. This is the era of American isolationism again. So the question then is, the Chinese are expanding, the Americans are not sure about what to do. the Japanese are all Hispanic. So there's a balance, sort of a weird balance of power that where all the three actors, main actors, are not going to disturb it. And if somebody, some small, flea disturbs it, like the North Korean, I'm sure the Chinese will say no, enough.
So from your
This is crazy.
analysis, it seems that the region shouldn't worry, that Southeast Asia, Asia and the Pacific, the Philippines shouldn't be worried about this threat.
No,
How
no.
about
Why would
the
the North Koreans bomb us?
how about the 43,000 Filipinos who live in Guam?
I think they're not worried too. I mean, when the point is, all if you remember the Pew Research Center survey of Filipinos, 92% of Filipinos are pro-American. 92% of Filipinos actually trust the United States. And the Filipinos living in Guam um, are seen by the outsiders as being in a state of danger. But if you go there, it's not, because in part because the communities here trust the Pacific Command of the United States. It's just very strong military still, and not just boats, it's missiles. So I think the Filipinos back home are more worried than the Filipinos here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think at this point that nuclear disarmament is possible at this stage? We've gone so far. They just successfully had an intercontinental missile that could possibly reach Alaska. You think it's still possible?
No. I mean, in part because the United States will not allow it. I mean, President Trump will not allow it. He's a very interesting guy. He wants to withdraw American forces from its global involvement, but he still wants America to be the strongest kid in the block. And how do Americans do that? Well, they do it by missiles. If you look at the history of American military since 1946, there's always this worry that we'll make sure that none of our boys will be killed, okay? So we'll bomb you. Okay. So it's all these missiles and drones that are the most important thing now, not soldiers. No. When in fact wars are won by soldiers. So I think in the case of if the U.S. will not do that, will not allow that, it will not demobilize its nuclear weapons, because that's the only way it could project power.
And how about North Korea? Do you think it's still possible for them to disarm or stop their nuclear developments?
You'll have to kill Kim Jong-un.
Okay, is there anything leaders in the region can do to manage the situation? You were talking about the leaders, Donald Trump obviously has a huge influence, China, Japan, but how about the smaller ASEAN leaders? Is there anything they could possibly do to manage the situation?
Well, there are two things that the ASEAN is actually has to relate with. The United Nations, it can go work with other regional bodies and go to the UN and let the UN, as a body, pressure Korea to reduce the threat. The other thing is to approach China. Okay, and here's how so ASEAN actually, the trade with China is going strong. China wants to be nice to the ASEAN, building roads in Cambodia and Laos, and being nice, sending weapons to the Philippines. Okay. So maybe ASEAN can talk to China and say, hey, please tell Kim Jong-un to slow down. And here's something that the Philippine government might want to do. So President Duterte wants to become good allies with China. Okay, here's a chance. Send Cayetano to President Xi and say, hey, we're worried here, even if we're not attacked, but we're worried about the North Koreans. Can you tell the North Koreans to desist? And that will be in that way, Duterte can show whether the Chinese are taking him seriously or not. Okay. The Philippine government has to be allies with China, so the Philippines should take the lead and tell China to spank Korea.
What do you think,
see what happens.
And what do you think is the best way to manage North Korea at this point, rather? Economic sanctions have not exactly been attractive for them. Recent tweets have said that Donald Trump is not one that they could converse with. What do you think is the best way to manage North Korea right now?
You'll have to go through China. I mean, the Chinese actually have accepted a UN resolution to impose sanctions on North Korea. Okay, so we will see what happens. The Chinese used to not do that before. The North Korea really relies on China a lot. Um, there are small trades, actually very weird trades with North Korea and Japan. For example, North Korea exports eel and vegetables to Japan. And in exchange, I think the Japanese send back stolen bicycles. Okay. There's in Osaka port. There's this weird trade that's going on. There's actually a big North Korean community in Japan too. If you cut that off, then the money that North Koreans living in Japan, are sending back, like Filipinos, to North Korea. You can cut off their supply. And that can affect the North. So you basically have to. Well, the sad thing really is it's the people who will suffer. Kim Jong Un will have his German beer at the end of the day, or his Swiss wine.
What?
Uh, so it's an either or thing. And your only hope is that one crazy general will just shoot him in the head, and start opening peace talks really with their cousins in the south. These are their relatives. Um, but everything goes to China now. The U.S. has lost the diplomatic game in Asia because of Trump, unfortunately.
So it seems that you suggested a general. It seems as if defection might be the only way at this point to really change relations between North Korea and the rest of the world.
Well, if you look at how all these narcissistic dictators fall, it's always the one who's loyal. Oh, going up as far back as Caesar, Eto Brute, then die Caesar. All these dictators died because one of their followers decided to stick a knife on the side. And I think in the case of North Korea, that will be the case, I think.
Okay, Professor, indulge me because I know that this whole interview you've said it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. It reminds me of when Trump was running and I asked analysts and they said it's never going to happen, I'm not going to answer that. But if you were to imagine what would happen if North Korea did go ahead and launch a missile attack on Guam, how would that affect the region, us in Southeast Asia who are closest to these countries?
None, because the Americans will bomb the hell out of North Korea.
So you foresee war?
The United States has missile systems south of Seoul, okay, designed to defend the North-South Korea from the north. But defense means it can also be changed into offensive weapons. There are submarines, nuclear submarines surrounding North Korea. There are, nuclear submarines based in Japan and Pacific Command. If the North Koreans do that, they'll be bombed. The U.S. will bomb the hell out of them. They'll be left with their weakened army. The South Korean army is one of the best in the world. Every young man has to join the army. So they're, in a sense, they're more trained than us Filipinos. So it's also a combat-ready society. And I don't think Kim Jong Un will agree to, will allow himself to be defeated that way. I mean, they're scared actually that the regime might just collapse, and the next thing you know, you'll be like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein being picked out of a secret hall and beaten to death. Gaddafi. And I think they're aware of that. So I'm still confident. If an escalation happens, you might come from the American side. But if they do try to send a missile to Guam, one missile, okay, Natasha, one missile. This is the era of multiple ballistic missiles. The U.S. will just bomb the hell out of Pyongyang.
So you believe that one missile is all it takes for the U.S., quote, to bomb the heck out of North Korea?
Well, the point is that one missile will not even probably cross the Pacific because the Japanese will shoot it down. Okay, and the Japanese will definitely shoot it down to de-escalate the situation. So your question is assuming that missile really hits Guam. And so the U.S. will scorch earth North Korea, and nothing will happen to the Philippines. Don't worry about it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for speaking with us. Professor Jojo is very optimistic about how these will not go through. But thanks for your time. We've been speaking with Professor Abinales about North Korea and the possible escalation of tensions in the region, which he has very specified that will not happen. That's
yes. You can go out and have dinner.
We can all go out and have dinner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good night.